These are the men who risk their lives to work underwater. The Seaway Defender heads an hour and a half out from the mouth of the Mississippi. She's a multi-million-dollar dive support vessel that sailed from the North Sea to the west coast of Africa. The Defender is part of a fleet owned by Stolt Offshore, the largest marine construction company in the world. Today, she steers for a dive site above the submerged tangle of pipelines that feed the hungry oil and gas processing plants of North America. 2 sections of pipe have been laid from an oil platform. They need to be prepped and connected 150 meters below the water, too deep for conventional divers. This job calls for a dive system introduced in the 1960s. A system so complex, it requires the assistance of 52 sailors and technicians. And so risky, the divers have to live apart from the rest of the crew, here, in a steel can. Inside, it's as cramped as a space capsule. And the images are just as crude. The barometric pressure has been increased to 17 times the norm, the same extreme pressure as the underwater worksite. The 6 divers will live at that pressure for a month. These guys are the elite of the diving world. They're fit and tough. This is no place for the faint of heart.
They're considered the top of the food chain out here. The divers are. All the younger guys that have gone through school aspire to be where they are. So yeah, they're looked up to.
These divers are known as the Sat Rats. And here's what they're up against. When a diver works down deep, the weight of the water forces the air he breathes into his tissues to the point of saturation. If the diver were to come quickly to the surface, the gas would form bubbles in the bloodstream that can cause decompression sickness, or what's called the bends. Every year in the United States, 100 divers die of the bends, many of them sport divers. As long as the Sat divers stay in a high-pressure environment, their tissues remain saturated, and they are protected from decompression sickness. But this solution causes another problem. When they talk, the divers sound like they've been sucking on helium balloons. That's because they breathe a mixture of oxygen and helium. Under high pressure, pure oxygen becomes toxic. The divers learn to understand this strange language. Eventually.
My first Sat, I locked in, there was a Scotsman, an Australian, and a Brit, Brits. And when I locked in, I honestly didn't understand anybody for 2 to 3 days.
Life in the Sat complex is no picnic. It's so small, a tour takes less than a minute. This morning, like every morning, the pressure and gases in the chambers are monitored in what's called the Sat Shack. In fact, The divers' whole lives are in the hands of the support crew.
That 2 beeps right there, the guy is asking for a flush on the toilet.
The toilet contents have to be pressurized before they leave the SAT complex. Untreated, they would explode the sewage system on the boat. Everything coming in has to be pressurized too, even the food. Like prisoners, the divers use taps to communicate.
2 taps to tell them to take the lock and take the food. When they're ready to send it back, they'll give me 2 taps like that.
When the divers aren't working, there's not a lot to do. They often just sit and wait for their turn in the water. The support crew occasionally checks out the divers through the portholes. Many of these young sailors long to be inside the SAT complex. It's where the big money is made. Some of the SAT rats earn as much as 6 figures, and the deeper they go, the more they make. That's because the deeper they go, the more deadly it can become. The Seaway Defender approaches the work site in the Gulf of Mexico. It's 150 meters below the surface. Anything below 100 is the domain of the SAT rats. The support crew prepares. The gear has to be ship-shape. In the SAT chamber, the divers are rested and ready to go. This is Mick Johnson. Michael Bleacher is the bookworm. They will be the first 2 divers on shift. They'll be in the water for 4 hours each. The divers squeeze from the living chambers into a section called the entry lock. The lock is then connected to a dive bell that will take them from the ship to the work site below. When Michael comes into the entry lock, he has to finish suiting up. Duct tape comes in handy here too. It's only 2 degrees Celsius where he's headed. Cold enough to kill in 15 minutes. The divers wear neoprene suits that will be pumped with hot water. Mick waits for him in the bell. The bell is lowered into the sea through a hole in the deck of the ship called the moon pool. This morning, the divers have to make sure the first section of new pipeline is free of debris. The umbilical that connects the divers to the surface is their lifeline. It's attached to the lift wire on the bell, so it doesn't stray in the current. It will take the divers a half hour to get to the job site. They will be down there for a total of 8 hours. While the divers descend, above deck on the bridge, the captain and positioning officer are wary of the wind and the currents. The Defender must hover over the dive site. If not, the divers could get dragged to their death.
And if the vessel is to go out of position more than 10 feet, we have alarms to bring the diver back to the bell.
4 diesel-electric thrusters are the muscle of a sophisticated positioning system designed to keep the ship steady. The divers have arrived at the work site. They double-check their gear. Michael will do the first 4-hour shift in the water.
Roger, dropping out of the bell.
Michael has a video camera on his dive helmet, so the ship can monitor his activity. Inside the Bell, Mick gives a wave. For now, he's the backup, ready to jump into the water at any sign of trouble. There's a 50-meter spool of umbilical on the dive bell. It provides the mixed gas, hot water, and communications with the ship, any of which could malfunction.
It's much like airplane travel. It's when something happens, it's catastrophic, but ordinarily nothing happens, and they're quite happy to do this kind of work. That's what they've trained for their entire lives.
It's like being a fireman. It's like being a jet pilot. There's a thing there that draws you to the dangers.
Standby gears in the water.
The divers get instructions from a supervisor on board. Below the bell is a 2-ton weight that doubles as a tool basket. It holds the emergency bailout bottles. They contain 4 minutes worth of gas, enough to get Michael back to the bell if his air is cut.
Roger, got 2,600 in the bailout. Well, why don't you pull your crossover tight, and we'll
The divers are constantly monitored.
downline, and we're way up off bottom. We'll see what we're going to do from there.
Michael pulls himself along a line parallel to sea bottom. In the silt and debris, it's his only guide to the pipeline that has to be connected.
Well, the pipe was laid from a platform that's about 1,500 feet or 15 miles away from us, and we are commissioning it. We're connecting the dots.
I got your reclaim running. What's your hot water temperature right now? 120, Roger, looking good.
The Sat Shack is the communications hub of the ship. The life support supervisor talks to Michael. He doesn't have what he needs in the underwater toolbox.
Now that pipe wrench may be hanging on the valve. Is there one in the basket there? Sean Bean, dive control. Yeah, let's get a pipe wrench ready to go down. He's down there looking for one right now. Pipe wrench coming down on the retrieving line.
There are no quick fixes underwater. It can take 10 minutes to get a tool from the surface to the job site.
Roger, Roger. Going to start breaking it loose.
Michael makes progress. One section of pipe is ready to be attached.
Yeah, roger that. Before we actually drop it off there, we'll have to do something with those hoses. But, yeah, you can... That's loose, huh?
Everything is logged. The control team is vigilant. They never know when something will go terribly wrong. They have to stay as cool-headed as 911 operators.
Roger that.
It can be heart-stopping. It can be sheer bone panic. You know, it depends upon what can happen. You know, you have so many what-if scenarios, and basically your initial reactions are going to decide the outcome most of the time, you know.
One of the worst-case scenarios for the divers is a call to abandon ship. Unlike the crew on deck, the divers can't just jump into a lifeboat. They need to be hustled to the surface and into what's called a hyperbaric rescue chamber.
In the event where we have an emergency, where we have to abandon the vessel, the divers are normally in this chamber here. They pass through this trunking, enter the hyperbaric rescue chamber, shut the door, vent the trunking, and we will push it back where a crane can pick up on it, or it'll float freely away to safety. It's got about 72 hours life support.
But that's not the only vital piece of equipment on the Defender. On its way to the work site is the Triton ST. It's big, it's strong, and in these waters, it's a diver's best friend. The Gulf of Mexico is one of the busiest underwater construction sites in the world. There are jobs here that would be impossible without the help of remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs. They are capable of working up to 1 kilometer under the surface, 3 times as deep as the sat rats. ROVs have dinosaur-like arms, strong enough to lift a grand piano. Often, they work alone. But this afternoon, the Triton holds the toolbox steady for Mick Johnson. It's his turn to work in the water. The Triton ST works like a remote-controlled airplane. A pilot on board the Defender guides the thrusters and the cameras from a distance. A co-pilot works the manipulator arm. It takes superior eye-hand coordination and lots of practice.
You get on a job, and the more you use it, the better you get. And the more repetition you get at it, unhooking shackles and hooks. The more you unhook them, the better you get at it.
Now, just stand by, Ray. I'll let you know when he's going to take his bill.
The 2 cameras on the ROV are the co-pilot's eyes. The arms on the Triton reproduce his movements. This particular arm is so sensitive, it mimics human touch. Frank can actually feel when the arm makes contact. The ROV also helps light up the work site. That's especially welcome by Mick, given what's lurking around the pipeline. A moray eel, 2 meters long and as thick as a diver's leg. It lives down here, and it's not too pleased with the uninvited company.
The eel that they keep running into. Secured.
Still down there on the receiver. They've got a big eel that keeps getting down in the mud with them, and they keep seeing it and feeling it. And now one diver said that it even latched onto his forearm. But you know, they all laugh about it. They get scared, then they laugh about it. And Duane says, "Mommy, I want my mommy," just as a joke, you know.
But it's no joke working in these waters. The pressure makes Mick exhausted by the end of his shift. By supper time, Mick and Michael have both finished their shifts.
Roger, I'm gonna start picking them up.
They're thirsty and hungry. They go back to the ship in the Bell. They kill time by telling war stories, like this one about a recent job off Boston. Winched back on deck, but one of the most dangerous parts of the workday is still ahead. Water and supplies are passed through to the divers. Then the Bell has to be reattached to the entry lock at a critical point. The extreme pressure on the divers has to be maintained at all times.
If and when anything ever goes wrong in a situation like this, it's generally at a lock. So we try and transfer them through as quickly as possible and make sure that they have doors closed to protect them from any kind of explosive decompression.
The divers transfer from the Bell to the entry lock. Michael will finally get to take a shower. The divers will be cooped up together for 4 weeks. Even after the job is finished, they have to stay in the chamber for days to slowly decompress. The deeper they've been working, the longer the decompression takes.
For every 100 foot you're in the water, it takes 1 day, plus 1 day. So if you're at 1,000 feet, it'll take 10 days decompression plus 1.
Mick's workday is over. He climbs back into the main sat chamber.
What they were wanting was their lights turned off because they're fixing to go to bed.
But the defender never sleeps. The first officer keeps watch. When this job is finished, the ship will go on to a new location. And another team of sat rats will head for the bottom of the sea.